Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and this week Royal Enfield came in with some big news with the full unveiling of their hotly anticipated Guerrilla 450 Naked Roadster. So could this be the best new budget-friendly bike for 2024? Well, in this video, we're going to go through all of the details to find out. Now, first up, let's talk about the engine. It's the same 450 liquid-cooled single-cylinder Sherpa engine that was first put to use in the Himalayan 450 that was announced last year. And look, this was always going to be a platform that they rolled out plenty of bikes on, so this is probably the first of a long line of 450 bikes from Royal Enfield over the next few years. The tune is pretty much exactly the same though, so it's just shy of 40 horsepower peak on tap and 40 Newton meters of peak torque, although they do say they've dropped a couple of teeth on the rear sprocket, and so it's probably going to feel a little more lively under acceleration when it's out on the road. Now, those power figures put it roughly on a par with the other 400s on the market, like the Triumph Speed 400, the KTM 390 Duke, the Husqvarna Vitpillen 4A1. And also, it's got to be said, it's a massive step up from the other sort of 350 single-cylinder nakeds in the Enfield lineup, which are air-cooled, not liquid-cooled, and so they make just over half the power and torque. I've always found those bikes a little bit too slow out on the open road, and so I'm expecting this bike to feel much more appropriate. And having borrowed the Himalayan 450 earlier this year, I was really quite impressed with the engine, and it still has plenty of that Enfield single-cylinder soul that does suit the Himalayan. But yeah, with the liquid cooling, it does allow them to rev it out a little bit more, and so for things like quick overtakes or cruising at 60 or 70, it just feels a lot more comfortable. The only downside I will say is it does vibe quite a lot at those sort of motorway speeds, which can be a little bit off-putting, and if you're thinking about doing a lot of touring or distance work, then maybe that could be a significant drawback, especially if you're fairly sensitive to vibes through the bars, the seat, the pegs. But what I will say is for the Guerrilla, well, it's more so designed to be like a town bike or a bit of weekend fun, and so you're much more likely to be riding it in the low revs or the middle of the rev range, or maybe up and down the box, as opposed to sitting at a constant speed for hours on end on the motorway, and so maybe it'll be a bit less of a deal breaker on this particular bike. Onto the chassis though, and like I say, this is much more road focused, so although it has a similar tubular steel frame construction as the Himalayan, the head angle's been changed so it's slightly more sporty in the handling. It's got a different subframe as well, which is said to be more appropriate for this style of bike, and also they've shortened up the swing arm, which has given it that shorter wheelbase, and again that should quicken up the turn-in. Wheels are cast aluminium as well, so you've got a 17-incher up front and a 17 at the rear, and these are actually being shod with some sort of semi-knobbly, maybe flat track inspired tyres for a bit of a rugged look. Now, there's a 43mm right way up fork up front, which is said to be developed in partnership with Showa. That's non-adjustable, and then a monoshock at the rear with preload adjustability only, but that does mean you can get the bike set up with the right stance if you're taking a passenger and or luggage. I will say as well, there's also 140mm of travel on the fork, 150 on the shock, and while that's nowhere near as much as like an adventure bike like the Himalayan, it is still a little more than perhaps your average road bike, which typically come in around 120mm, and so maybe this will be a decent bike combined with those semi-knobbly tyres for, slightly rougher than average roads, and again I think that makes it quite appealing as sort of a versatile commuter. Braking comes from Brembo's budget-friendly sub-brand Bybre, which is really common on these sort of Indian-made mid-capacity roadsters, and you've got a single 2-piston caliper up front that's actually mounted, that's on a 310mm disc, and a single pot caliper at the rear on a 270mm disc. Now, I'll do a deeper comparison at a later date with some of the competition, but I will say, just looking at the spec sheet, this bike does look a little more basic than, the Triumph, the KTM, the Husqvarna. But then again, the riding could add up to more than the sum of its parts, so I'll have to wait to properly review it. And also, Enfield tend to be really quite good on price, so there's always going to be a little bit of a trade-off for that. Now again, looking at the spec sheet, I think this is going to make a great commuter bike given the ergonomics, a town bike. because that tubular steel frame really does dip down at the waist, and that gives it a very low accessible seat height of 780 millimeters. Then combined with that, if it's fully fueled up at 90% of the tank and all the other liquids are on board, it tips the scale at just 185 kilograms, which I think is really quite decent. So I'm going to expect this bike to feel really nice and easy to manage, easy for all but the shortest riders to get their feet down, and also quite nimble and agile. The only caveat is if you're a taller rider, perhaps it's going to feel a little too low or maybe a little bit cramped. But I believe there is an accessory seat which raises it by another 20 millimeters, so that'll make it 800. Or you could look at something a little more spacious like the Himalayan 450 or maybe even the Triumph Scrambler 400X. But yeah, for its intended purposes as an accessible roadster, I do think it looks pretty good. Now in terms of tech, I know some people like all the latest gadgets and gizmos, while others like the simplest bike possible, and so perhaps you'll be pleased to know that you can pretty much spec this bike up as you wish. In the most basic form, it gets an analog dash, much like the ones you'll see on some of their 350 bikes, so you've got the speed around the outside and a small LCD display in the middle for some of the other riding info. And then as an optional accessory, you can add their Tripper navigation pod for a little bit of modernity, and that basically pairs with the Royal Enfield app so you can plot a route, and the little Tripper navigation pod gives you simple turn-by-turn directions for that route right there in the cockpit. The other option is to go for one of the more premium models, and these get the same full TFT display as the Himalayan 450, and I think for me this has to be a worthwhile upgrade, not only because you get extra connectivity features and also a bit more screen space for stuff like the navigation, but also it's just generally more pleasant to use, and I think they've done a great job of designing the layouts and graphics. So for me, that's probably the one to go for if your budget allows it. And I should also give a huge shout out to our partners over at Cardo for supporting the channel and sponsoring this video. You see, if you want to make the most of some of the media and connectivity features of a dash like this, then a good Bluetooth headset is an absolute must. And here at MOTOBOB, we use their brilliant PackTalk Edge, which I can wholeheartedly recommend. Not only does it have JBL designed speakers for that brilliant audio quality, which is great if you're listening to music or podcasts, but also it comes with their dynamic mesh communication system, which gives you up to 15 riders in a group with a mile between each. So it really is very good if you want to chat to your riding buddies on a big group ride. Also, the cool thing with the mesh system is that the more riders that join, the stronger the network gets. And if someone drops off the group, there's no need to manually pair them back in when they catch up, because they get automatically and seamlessly healed back in as soon as the connectivity is available. Genuinely, I love using mine when I'm out with friends, so do check out the link down in the description below. And also down there, you'll find a discount code specifically for my viewers. Now, lastly, on the tech front, you'll also find 2 riding modes on this bike with either performance or eco. And while I fully expect most people are going to leave it in that performance mode the majority of the time, perhaps the eco is a good little handy fallback if you're ever running super low on fuel. Now, one thing that I think Enfield always does really, really well is a wide range of vibrant color choices and graphics, and this bike is absolutely no different. You see, you've got Brava Blue, Yellow Ribbon, Player Black, Gold Dip, or Smoke Silver. And personally, while I do appreciate the wide range of options, I actually think I like the simplicity of the Smoke Silver on this bike, but let me know your pick down in the comments below. Overall, I think the looks are kind of an interesting blend. It is part retro, but also part angular and modern. And so for me, it sort of sits between something more traditional, like the Triumph Speed 400, and something more edgy, like the Husqvarna. Maybe it's not my favorite of the bunch. I think Triumph probably have the best styling of the bunch here, followed by the Husqvarna. But still, I wouldn't say it's a particularly bad looking bike. And again, I'd love to know your pick down in the comments below. Now, luckily for me, in terms of price, that silver is the most affordable of the bunch at £4,850, but it climbs to $4,995 for the Player Black and Gold Dip colors, and $5,050 for the Yellow Ribbon and Brava Blue. But thing is, although I do really like the visuals of that silver model. I assume that's the one that comes with the analog dash, and so actually, if I was shopping for one of these bikes, I'd probably end up going for one of the more premium versions to get that full TFT display. Either way, they all look pretty decent on price and less than all of the competition I've highlighted here in the UK. So the Triumph Speed 400 is £5,195, the Husqvarna Vitpillen 401 is $5,599, and the KTM 390 Duke is top of the pile at $5,699. Thing is though, will it be as good as those bikes out on the road, or is it worth the extra cash to get the slightly better riding bike? Well, I think on paper, the chassis spec is a little more basic than all of those bikes. But you know, quite often the way a bike rides can be different to what the spec sheet suggests, and so I'm really looking forward to taking one out for a spin later this year to find out what it's like. As always though, do let me know what you think of it down in the comments below, and do hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on MOTOBOB. I'll also leave on the screen now my full review of the Speed 400 from Triumph, which I think is realistically the closest competitor for this bike, so do give it a click and give it a watch if you haven't already. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.